Hello, lovely human beings. It's so lovely to have you here today. Thank you all so much for taking the time. After a short break, I can see both Simon and Nicole in the chat, referencing the conference or missing us after a week's break. So it's an absolute joy to be back. Thank you all so much for taking the time. Let's get going straight into the introduction. So, if you haven't already, do pop in the chat feature where you're watching from, because I can see the likes of David, Montserrat, John, Simon, Giles, Nicole, Vicky, Emily, Annette, Mel, James, Karen, Sarah, Jess, and so many more popping in to say hello. It's a joy to have you here. And Doreen, who has popped in that you're watching from West Cork, it's a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time. If you haven't already, you've got some instructions on your screen right now to switch your chat messages from hosts and panelists to everyone, so everyone can see your messages, which will just make an easier conversation because it will mean that it's not just Nishma and I who can see your messages today. So today's speaker is Nishma Patel Robb of Glittersphere, which is really lovely to be able to introduce you that way as well today. So really exciting. The Glittersphere is a personal brand accelerator helping brilliant women become unmissable in their industries. And we'll definitely touch on that as we go through the rest of today's session. Nishma is also one of those people who has an incredible greatest hits list of positions over the course of her profession. Not that the titles ever really matter, it's always about the humanity. But when you sort of say that Nishma's been the president of the History of Advertising Trust, the 101st president of WACL, on the CMO Advisory Council for Spotify, and of course the senior director of brand and reputation at Google, you go, wow, what an amazing set of accomplishments. And then, of course, we've got the fantastic human being to add into the mix there as well. Before we get, the reason why I thought today's session would be particularly interesting is that Nishma has taken the journey from these places of these incredible accolades and these large organizations into what is effectively a startup enterprise. And so learning these lessons in brand building from the big into the small, but also just the generic lessons that sit with brand building, I thought would be fascinating for all of our community. Before we get started, it's important to say thank you to our sponsors, because without them, we wouldn't be able to bring these sessions to you. So this week's featured sponsor is a company called Frontify. Now, for those of you who are aware or have experienced the pain, the agony of people like me using the wrong logos in your slide decks, or using the wrong shape, or not having access to specific files, then Frontify help you solve this problem and much more. So for those of you who are screaming into your brand consistencies ethers right now, I don't know why I'm getting so poetic about this, then do take the time to check out Frontify. Also, a big thank you to Sticky Beak, to Planable, to Cambridge Martin College, Redgate, and Frontify. Without these sponsors, then we wouldn't be able to make these sessions happen. So that's my introduction done. Today is a pure conversation. So between Nishma and I, we're going to have a chat, and I would encourage you to use the Q&A feature down below so we can lace in those questions as the conversation goes. First things first, I want to make sure that I give you the opportunity just to speak about the Glittersphere, Nishma, because that's important, and I think it might give a nice segue into the rest of the chat. So could you describe it and why it felt important for you to start the Glittersphere, and everything about it?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much, Joe. And thank you for everyone for choosing to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And it's the second one. Last time I spoke to you, I think it was just out of lockdown, actually, not long after lockdown, and I was still at Google at the time. So yeah, let me tell you a little bit about what kind of led me to the Glittersphere and what it is. So as you said, I've had a 30-year career. I talk about it from analog to AI in terms of media and advertising. It's stretched from teletext through to Google. In that time, helping all sorts of different types of businesses, small to large, to really grow using media, whether that's kind of analog media, back in the day when it was teletext and only 9 graphics behind ITV and Channel 4, right through to Google and all of the whole Google suite of products. So in the 10 years that I was there, I saw the business from search through to the multiple products and platforms that we had, from YouTube to cloud to then of course Gemini, etc. And actually I launched Gemini in the UK. It was one of the last things I did before I left Google. Spent that last year working specifically on AI as a product. But I hit a point when I was a couple of years ago and I turned 50, and I had that moment of going, what do I want to do next for the next 10 or 15 years of my career? And as much as I was loving what I was doing at Google, I did have a moment to kind of really think about how I wanted to focus on doing the stuff I really love doing, which for me, there were three things. Is I love building brands. I'd done that most of my career and I wanted to continue thinking about how I did that. I love speaking and I love curating. I've always really enjoyed whether it's stories or people or putting them all together was something I really felt passionate about. And ultimately, this kind of drive to see greater equality. So my observation in throughout my career, but particularly probably the last 5 years, was really around seeing the continual challenge around equality in the workplace, but particularly in seeing brilliant women not necessarily getting the investment, the funding, or the support they should get. We know that that's woefully down at 2%, still actually dropped slightly to 1.8% this year, which is shocking even further. And often seeing that that wasn't a lack of ability or ideas. Actually, some of the ideas used to completely blow me away. I was really fortunate that I had a couple of programs I worked on at Google that I loved. One was around digital skills training. So this was free digital skills training that we used to actually at times used to go all around the country and give them, or we had online services. Through that, I met so many incredible people and saw the power that those skills then kind of translated through to success and business growth. And then at the other end of the scale, we had a startup kind of investment fund, an accelerator, which was used to be under our campus brand, but it was Google for Startups. And we used to have some different schemes where we awarded grants or funds to different business owners. We had a Black business founder fund, we had a women founder fund. And through that, I would see some incredible businesses, but I could often see one common thread. And we used to get to volunteer as a marketing team to support a lot of the startups. It was a great way to get some experience. And the number one thing that every single one of those businesses needed was great marketing. They needed a great brand story and they needed great marketing. And we started to see that there was definitely a correlation between businesses, irrespective of how brilliant the idea and product was, if they didn't have their story and they didn't have their marketing quite right, and that's not just about the story you tell, but it's how you tell it, where you tell it, etc., that investment piece, it was a predeterminant about the success of that business. So it got me thinking about where I wanted to focus my efforts and my talents, was to say, actually, do you know what? I want to dedicate my time to helping women be more visible and to help them tell their story to unlock financial freedom. And that was whether it was the woman I met in the digital skills garage in Manchester who walked in, who hadn't worked for 15 years because she'd given up her career to look after her kids and then was like, I need to work again, but the world has changed. And we helped to get those skills. And 9 months later, I happened to bump into her and she walks into the garage and she's, looking amazing. She's a boss lady and she's full of confidence. And she had discovered the idea of being a virtual assistant, had become a virtual assistant, and had recruited a lot of other women to now work for her. And she was her own businesswoman, and that alone would have been enough for me. But when she leant in and also said to me, it wasn't just the confidence and the empowerment that she had, but she leant in and quietly said in my ear that she'd also left her husband, who'd been she'd been a victim of domestic violence for the last 20 years, just sent shivers down my back. And I remember at the time recognizing that financial freedom gives us so much more choice and opportunity. So whether it was those real human stories and opportunities through to those startups, where I met a woman recently who has an amazing climate tech startup in AI climate tech startup, which will be a game changer for us. And there's all those kind of real, they're not always social impact. Some, a lot of these are just better than what we have today opportunities. But the criminal activity there would be if these businesses don't get funded and the opportunity. So my idea was to create the Glittersphere, which I have now launched, which, as I said, is a personal brand accelerator. It's a community, it's a movement to get us talking and telling our stories. It's called Glittersphere because of the way that we radiate out light. I love music, as you can see my decks and the DJs there, because I don't believe there's anywhere more authentic or more democratic and a space where we're more our authentic selves than on a dance floor. So I wear sequins because it gives other people a dopamine hit, and I like to release energy because get people dancing. So yes, that's and my vision for Glittersphere is I hope to really make a meaningful difference to the stories that are told by women and other good men as well. Actually, I think it's been really critical recently, and I've always believed in a side-by-side approach. So that's
Lovely.
that. But
Love.
my God, nobody could have ever prepared me, or do we talk enough about how hard it is to start a business? To go
Mm.
from 30 years of corporate working to now being a startup, I have so much more love and affection for all of those smaller businesses, of which I have worked with in the past, but never really been totally responsible for, to recognize the challenge that sits ahead of them in terms of how do you really kind of get attention, get noticed, scale, grow, etc.
I love that so much, and thank you for that context and for speaking so brilliantly. That's, just I'm getting shivers here, but it's fabulous. There's been a few comments on your Zoom background here as well, Nishma.
Yeah,
Like,
it's real.
just
It's not a fake one.
I think it might be the best in the world ever. I think it's fabulous. Not to discredit the weight of everything you've just said, to be trivial, but it's really something quite
No.
special. Um, there are so many ways that we can take this conversation, and your answer was so rich there because you mentioned elements of building brands, speaking, and curation being your passions. Um, but then you also mentioned the hardness element of small business and small business marketing as well. And so I guess maybe that's where I'll start the questions, which is reflecting on this transition that you've been on recently, and you've gone into a space of small business marketing. What has surprised you? What do you think is important when it comes to building small brands? Having had all this experience for the past 30 years in these larger corporates, what surprised you about being important in small business
Yeah.
marketing that perhaps you didn't
So I
realize?
think, yeah, I think the kind of the key lessons that I've taken from, my experience and past career, particularly at Google running brand reputation marketing, it was around, there were a few things that I think we were obsessive then that I'm obsessive about now. So one was obsessive about the customer, and I mean every single potential data point you can have. So we had a richness of data at Google, no doubt. When you're a small business owner, you've got to think really carefully about what can you know, what can you learn, and how do you process that. So just as an example, one of the things I did as I was first starting up Glittersphere, I had a waitlist form, an interest form, and I had kept the last question of that interest form a kind of a free field text, and I simply asked people to say, "What would you hope the Glittersphere is?" Something to that nature.
Mhm.
And it was one of those things I put in because it was a genuine curiosity to go, we can all sit back and believe we know what we know and we think we're going to do, but the reality is always like asking others about it. And we had huge mechanisms for doing this and different ways of doing it at Google, but I always knew personally as a marketeer that our best work came from the little bits of insight and thought that came. So I think that genuine interest around, well, what does the customer really want, feel, need? And does that marry to what I believe I'm going to create? And I put this form out, not really knowing what I was going to get. I think at that stage, I was probably hoping just for a sense of interest
Mhm.
that, there's a little bit of that validation of an idea. And I was overwhelmed. I had like something like 350 responses in a very
Wow.
short space of time. It was amazing. It was really overwhelming, really exciting. But the best bit out of it, I probably had about 300 responses out of that 350, which A shows incredible effort and engagement,
Mhm.
but paragraphs
Wow.
paragraphs of really rich insight that someone had just said, this is how I feel, this is what I want, this is what I need. And that was a gift because if I hadn't done that, I probably would have headed off in a direction that wouldn't have been as successful, who knows it's successful. I'm too early to say that, but it wouldn't have been as appreciated or needed. But
Mm.
instead, I got from that real sense of going, okay, I see where the focus is here. I understand a little bit more. So I think that obsession about the customer and understanding them has definitely stayed with me. And I think whether that's mining the reviews, mining the comments, whether it's on your own work or your competitors' work or someone you admire, I think there is so much, we all talk about the richness in the comments. I'm obsessed about reading comments, reading reviews, because that's where I think you really learn. So I have retained and keep doing that. I think the other thing has really been around also responding in a way that is timely. And I haven't done that. So that's where I can say
Smart.
I have failed because I allowed a lot of technology to kind of almost slow me down. So interestingly, we weren't brilliant at doing that at Google, but that was more because of the bureaucratic nature of where things would get dealt with, and it was one of the things I found really frustrating is actually when you have a problem, you would get ended up in some faceless, dreadful kind of like hole of you can't get the help you needed. And it was never intentional, but the scale that Google was, it needed to have more automated systems. I had, when I was first starting at the Glittersphere, had created what I thought was some automated processes. Not that I didn't want to be close enough, but I think partly a bit of old business, large business thinking
Mhm.
it was the worst thing I could do because it meant I was quiet and I wasn't engaging. So I ripped that down and I've offered everybody who was there initially a 15-minute call, which would be richness for me as it is for them. So I think getting close and responding, like thinking about those little touches make a big difference. It sounds like business running, but this is all marketing, right? Getting the insights, learning more, being the best that you can in terms of delivering. And then the other key things have been, there's kind of key tenets of brand, like where can you have consistency of your kind of design cues or the graphical cues, whatever. So I go from everything that my name is about Glittersphere. I love wearing sequins. I do every day. I make it very much my personal brand in the business. I literally live in a little kind of real life disco ball. But I've made sure that in weirdly for something that's a business that's so in its infancy, when people meet me, they go, "Oh, Glittersphere." And yes,
Yep.
it might be because I'm wearing it, but I've coded some of that in. And
Mm.
when I talk about actually some of the things I think we have the challenges, I think some of these low hanging fruit of what are the codes you can put out there with the real kind of repetition and consistency that makes a difference across every bit of your kind of real estate, online and offline, really matters. Again, I didn't get that right from the beginning, but I'm course correcting to make sure that is. Um, and then it's around the free stuff that's available. So there's all the obvious kind of claim your listings, claim your rewards, all that kind of good stuff. But AI, I couldn't have started this business without AI
Mhm.
because, well, I could have done, but everything would have taken a lot longer.
Yep.
And so being able to really be, and I've had to be so hungry with my learnings. When I left Google, I had a little bit of a break before I just kind of jumped into this adventure. One of the things I did, like massively geekily, but I loved it because I'm an avid learner, is I took myself on a solo holiday and I sat on this beach and I knew that the only AI I had really been immersed in was Google's AI. I had
Mhm.
no real concept of anything else out there. And I decided that one of the first things I needed to do was to broaden my understanding of what else was available, how was it being taught, what were people doing with it. I remember sitting on a beach while everyone else was drinking tequila, and I sat and did loads of AI training courses, which waiters thought I was nuts. But it was brilliant, and I still do. I make a habit of every single week. I have two things I do every single week, which is all about this kind of expansion bit. I think it makes me a better marketeer or business owner. Is I embrace a new bit of AI every week and try it, grade it. I don't over throw things away. I might come back to it because I know things are progressing. And I try and meet somebody new. That's my other
Mm.
thing. Once a week, try and meet somebody I've never met before because you just never know where that serendipity gets to. So yeah, I think from Google it was around that, obsession about the customer, thinking about the data, thinking about what processes or ways to, good and bad that could help facilitate delivery. And then I think it's been one of the things we didn't do is we weren't, I think it was classic within any business. I've been able to have a much greater obsession about what other tools and products and things are there. And I think that's been really helpful. I think also just being much more collaborative and not that
Mm.
Google weren't, but I'm able to as a smaller business is there is so much out there in the world. There is so much in terms of like we talk about abundance, but there really is. And I think not approaching any of this journey as a marketeer in that sense of, well, it's ours and there's lots of complicated ways of how we do. I meet people so regularly or approach people with always that collaboration mindset. And I go, well, we'll work it out, we'll figure it out,
Mm.
not allowing some of the normal hurdles of business to get in the way, but actually saying, we can figure this out. There's enough flex to do so. And that's been a really helpful way of doing it. And then it's really around actually affordability of things. That's the challenge. We had, insane budgets at Google, as you would expect. And sometimes that's challenging, right? Because actually you layer in additional processes you don't necessarily need because you have the money and people to do so. And sometimes I think it could thwart innovation at times. Everyone was great thinkers and there was a lot of innovative thinking there, but there was definitely times that when you're really having to be scrappy and you're having to really think laterally, it opens up a totally different space. And I think the thing I've learnt to do more than ever is a little bit of building in public.
Hmm.
So I share ideas more broadly. I have different groups and communities, Glittersphere being one of them, but others as well that I regularly go, what do you think about this? Because what I've learned is, and I think particularly now, is that kind of crowd way of building and innovating and understanding is so much more effective than just the kind of build, test, and then reiterate. Yes, you're going to test and reiterate, but I do it in a much more public forum. And I think all small businesses should really think about almost like who's in your little group, whether it's competitors or businesses that might have adjacencies or different interests, but who could be your community or group that you can do that test and reiterate and learn from really quickly. Because I think pace is faster than it's ever been, I think now. And I think that's probably one of the most overwhelming things as a business owner, small business owner now, is the pace of change. Even if you get past all the admin and the bureaucracy and trying to figure things out, it's pace. You've got to constantly go, right, okay, this is moving, algorithms are changing. What do I do? And the prioritization, where do I put my effort? The free, so organic spaces, which are having great success now with the right messages, or if I am going to have any paid, how am I going to manage that? And I've had to be really careful about the paid because we're early days and I've got no idea of what the return on some of these things are going to be and how do I favor and do that. Through both those channels, I mean, I've thought about free because on this stuff never really is truly free, is I have, not surprisingly, lent into personal brand.
Hmm.
And I have the pleasure through the Glittersphere of working with quite a few founders and business leaders as well, actually very senior business leaders to help them build their personal brand. But with the founders, it has been an outsized impact on the business. And I kid you not, I mean, I don't think even I'd expected the kind of results and returns they're getting. But this is about real business growth, and they are now, for some of them, the most important marketing channel they have. When we've activated them, how they built their personal brand, how they turn up, how they use channels, how they engage. So the storytelling is critical, the creativity, the tone of voice, etc. It's not just what you say, it's how you say it, where you say it. When we activate that across some of their employees, these are, businesses between maybe sort of 3 to 30 employees. It can be more, some of the bigger businesses are, but roughly in that space. We're not talking volume of people. When we've activated their personal brands as well, it's incredible. It really is. I cannot stress enough why I think this is such an interesting and exciting space. Not to say it's not fraught with challenges, but they're definitely, it's a more exciting field to be in. And I think smaller businesses have the advantage here because the one thing I know, larger businesses are struggling to get their head around how they build personal brands around their leaders or CEOs and how they activate employee brands. Because employee advocacy requires a whole set of rules and regulations, etc. It'll take them time. It's always going to be a little bit thwarted and challenged. Whereas I think smaller, medium-sized businesses have an outsized opportunity right now if they embrace it.
100%. And I see that Hannah Hooton is on the call right now. So I wanted to shout out Hannah because Hannah is the head of marketing and sales over at an agency called Genie Goals. I used to work for them a long, long time ago, but in no way affiliated now. And I just want to shout out Hannah on your last point here, Nishma, because I have seen them as an agency, so they're a digital marketing agency, go about the activity of creating a real sort of employee sort of engagement through personal brand on LinkedIn. And I've got to say, it's fabulous as an effort, like as a case study. I think I'd really encourage folks to check them out because they're in a very specific niche. They're not a huge company, but what they do is they do it incredibly well. And I fully agree with you on the opportunities that it creates here. You got so much there, Nishma. Like, what a fantastic answer. I think I counted 6 or 7 different tips or tricks there, just as you were speaking through, and each one of them was so rich. So thank you. That's really, really appreciated. And thank you also to the community. I can see that there's 8 open questions here, which in a similar way to your feedback form, they've come through in paragraphs. So like we've got some really rich questions to get through quite shortly. I want to pick up on a couple of elements before we get to that place though, because there's 2 things that you mentioned up front which I think are fascinating and could really help folks in this session. So at the beginning, you said that one of your passions was building brands, and then you've also mentioned storytelling a few times today. And so this is what the 2 questions are going to revolve around, and I'll do them one by one. So I should have asked this question up front, but what do you think are the tenets of a great brand? Because you've had all this experience and, of course, this recent experience, but what sits at the core of it for you?
So I think that the key thing for me for a brand is everything you do around the way you communicate it, the name, how it looks, the design cues, etc., have to be not just a thing that nudges the mind, but explain it. It's got to land in your brain. This is why I'm going to connect to the storytelling question in a minute, but it's so critically important. A brand isn't just, we all know this, and everyone on this call knows a brand is not just a logo and a website and that. But how you bring meaning, how you bring association to that is really important. Now, traditionally, that's always been through advertising and storytelling and the kind of associations it might be with particular characters. I think interestingly now, and it's even stuff you see in the Edelman Trust report earlier this year. I actually think people associate brands even more so now with how others see them and how they see themselves in them or with them. So personal association, how others see it. I'll give you a really good example here. So there is a brand, and I won't name the particular brand because it would be unfair for me to do so, but this brand has, I think, recently been really challenged about how truthful they had been around their kind of purpose and product. And although inherently they have been incredibly successful and have done some really good work, this little kind of chip right now, which is about reputation, but it is about the kind of transparency and honesty of what they've done, has definitely given them a hit. I have seen people step away from their association with that to the point that even if they are a customer of and user of that product, they won't talk about it. And I always say to people, like in such a noisy world, your brand is a thing that will help you stand out, but it's not as it used to be. So I think now clarity is the new currency. I
Interesting.
think, before it was around currency, really it was how
Mhm.
much you had and how visible you could be in a paid sense was the thing that cut through. I think it's now clarity. And I mean clarity not just about what your brand is and what you stand for, but how people feel about you and where do you fit into someone's life or set of values without necessarily going down a purpose route. But we have a sense of, we make those snap judgments so quick, whether it's in a shop, on a screen, whatever. I think that clarity is the most important. And whether that's through stories, design cues, associations, how you appear, and all of that 360, but it is the thing I think is the most important thing.
That's a fabulous answer, and whether this is conscious or not, I suspect it is. I mean, it does lead us perfectly into the segue,
Oh, it
into the storytelling, because I, you know, I think a lot of folks on the call will be on board with the theory of storytelling, um, but they say that they work for a engineering company in a business park on the outside of Cambridge or whatever it may be. And finding that story can be quite tricky
is.
for folks in that situation. So I wanted to ask how you go about telling that story or finding that story, because that feels like it's something that has been so
Yeah.
present for you in your world.
I've always loved, since I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to be a storyteller and I tried my hand at journalism and failed at that. I just discovered it wasn't my thing and then kind of bounced through different things, whether it was sales and marketing, etc. But stories are the thing that's helped us educate and connect since the beginning of time. Stories now, and really think about it, because it is quite overused as a term without its kind of, as you say, kind of really actually, what's the true application of that? And so there's 2 things. One, I used to have this chap work for me, a wonderful man called Gaston, who's now at odd box actually. And Gaston was an incredible storyteller. While he was with me, he went off and did this kind of master's in creative writing. And he came back and he said to me, I think every story we tell, whether it's a presentation, whether it's a campaign brief, whatever, should follow the arc of Hemingway. And I was a bit like, what? And he had this brilliant little slide deck where he did, but he showed how actually if we took a Hemingway approach, which is really simplistic storytelling, there are a number of different arcs, whether it's a quest or it's a rags to riches, whatever it might be. There are a number of different arcs. And then there's the classic kind of start, middle, and end, really. It's not overly complicated, but there is a simple framework to use. And it got me thinking about going, we don't really do that, because actually at Google, we used to have a mantra, still is, I believe, that it was all about, show, don't tell, understand the user, understand the magic, connect the two. But actually, if I was honest and looked at a lot of our stories and doing it, we weren't doing it. What we were doing was just a lot of tell, features,
Mm.
features, features. This is why it's great. This is brilliant. Everyone says this. Um, and almost kind of not letting the product talk for itself. It's just kind of broadcasting and shouting at people. Or we would do we would let sometimes start in the middle and go to the end. There wasn't really a beginning. There was nothing to kind of open and introduce. So it was interesting when we stepped back and were really critical of our own work. It was like, actually, where is this? So I think there's that around actually story structure. And then it's like the purpose of the story. And I always say, like, unless the story makes you feel something, you're going to really struggle to be memorable because there is just too much being thrown at us all the time. And so feeling doesn't have to be, got to be like, tug on the heartstrings and make you cry. It can be laughter, it could be annoyance, it could be agreement, whatever it is, but it's just got to have something in it that doesn't make you just feel nothing, which unfortunately a lot of advertising does, or a lot of marketing or storytelling does. Um, and I think it's also then recognizing that there are different stories for different reasons. So there's like your vision story as a leader, as a
Mm.
founder, or a business owner, or whatever, right? What's your vision for your business? That story has got to be clear and articulate. There's your story for your people. So actually, what's the internal story like? How people, why you're there, probably why you tell people when you're recruiting them, and then the story of your customers. The three should connect. They shouldn't be different. And what I have found when I sit and try and think about stories is I allow myself to be playful enough to think about that Hemingway structure. Take yourself back to being a kid. Imagine you're doing your English GCSE, you've got to do some creative writing, like genuinely start it from that point.
Uh-huh.
Let yourself be kind of structured by the business bit. So that takes you out of the tell and you start to show a bit more because you'll force yourself to go, well, why am I doing this? Let's say it is a bit of engineering tech and you're sat in where would you be say, on the edges of somewhere or another. And I can tell you now, when we were trying to market Chrome, no one gave a shit. It was a browser. I would say, like, how are we going to get people excited about a bloody browser? Right.
Mm.
This was like, everyone used Internet Explorer. Why did I give a shit about this new browser? And we had to get really creative with how we told this story. The story was very little about the browser. It was about what the browser facilitated. It was the opportunities and the dreams that lived inside of that space that we talked about. And I think that idea of telling that story of whether it's showing the impact of what you do, transformations are always the best types of stories. You went from here to there. I didn't even think about it, but did one at the start of this when I told you about the lady in Manchester.
Absolutely.
And they're the things that stay with you. That story of that lady stays with me because it was made such an impact on me, as a real person thing. So again, if you go back to those customer feedback, customer comments, I bet you'll find some really magical stories of either how products are being used, your products being used, how you've had an impact on an individual, how you transformed them. And those are the stories that you should tell. Too often, all of us, and I've done this as well, marketers, we start with going, well, what's the story I need to tell? Well, the story I need to tell is it's going to make you faster and it does these 10 things and it's better than that, etc. I'm
Mhm.
not saying those things aren't important, but they're not in your first initial story if you want to catch someone. So that's why I think now there is a great democratization of tools about how we tell our stories, and whether that's, God, look at the latest chat GPT visualization stuff, or even all the AI, generative AI tools. But the best stories, you can use all those tools to do it, will come from the insight or the things that make you feel something. And I think if we could engage marketeers particularly to do a lot more of that, it makes our world much more interesting because we get to learn and see all this from each other. But I do believe it's where I've seen the most effective work. And it gets you out of boring. I think too much, we're so concerned with being safe that we're restricting our ability to storytell and dream. And actually, if I had anything, it'd be like go beyond it.
Nice. I love that as a final bit of encouragement. And I think there's so many prescient things to pick up as part of that. I think the fact that you pointed to multiple stories for multiple reasons, I think is really, really important because it's not something that, even if you're invested in the storytelling, I know this for myself, I will often tell the same story. And actually, there are different stories for different reasons. I did, however, I want to follow up on that question because I think it's so interesting that you mentioned like the number of responses that you got in the feedback form, but then you also told a story at the beginning of today. And I guess I wanted to know how you personally know knew the right story to pick, because there would be a founder story, there would be something which is you and your heart, but then there would be a different story which is one of the 300 pieces of feedback that you got back in that form, or an interaction that you had. So how do you pick the right story to tell? And this is you personally, but I'd just be really interested for
Yeah.
your own
So
business.
I think firstly you're right. There's a really I think it's and I know you had him at your conference recently, but and his name's completely gone my head, not come back from my
You
head.
think Jeremy
Jeremy.
Jeremy? Yeah.
Jeremy Ekman, I think he's just the greatest. I will like worship at Jeremy's feet. I think he's the greatest storyteller and advocate for storytelling there is. But he always gives this great tip, which was around like on your phone in your notes app, just start capturing your stories. Like every day when you see something, it could be something it may seem little, or it might be a story, it might be a bit of feedback, whatever it might be. It might even be like one of the things when I was at Google, we used to listen to why the engineers built stuff, and I used to jot them down. Anyway, the reason why I picked that story, because you're right, I think everyone should have a bank of stories because you have different stories for different moments. I think that story I told about that woman in the Manchester garage is so directly linked to why I'm doing what I'm doing. I don't think there's a better explanation of my motivation to want to help achieve financial freedom for women, because I think otherwise it can feel like an empty bit of platitude or kind of, corporate jargon. But there is a real reason. I mean, that I still vividly remember that moment. And it's like with anything, you then tune in. So I had
Mhm.
my own life experiences that I probably not paid attention to that were not dissimilar. And yet you kind of pay attention to others then. And that sense of being able to be observant is a superpower for marketeers. It's where I've always seen, taste and observation are the two critical factors of great marketeers. So when you're really observant, I think that's what really sticks with you. And for me, that story was probably the best example of why I'm choosing to do what I'm doing.
Love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. I think that closeness is so important. It strikes me that maybe on a tactical level, and maybe you'll agree or disagree on this, but like I'm putting myself in the shoes of the old agency that I used to work for, and the story wasn't I while I was gaining stories to tell about the agency at the time, really in the first instance, the story that I needed to be told was the agency's founder's story. And so to actually go and interview, it was a him, so go and interview him and say, what's the reason you started this thing? Because, I mean, selling PPC, everyone does, everyone does that. But, the reasons this exists
Yeah.
felt so important. So thank you for that
I
section.
think that's why also like personal brand is still a bit icky. Like we
Yeah.
still, I mean, I do. We all still feel uncomfortable with it, not just the act of it, but the idea of even discussing it, which we
Hmm.
have got to change our attitudes to it. And I know you had brilliant Ash Jones and Claudia on brilliant,
Yes.
who are absolutely brilliant in this space as well. I find that when I get people to talk about personal brand, or I talk about with women, particularly visibility, is there is a little bit of kind of the therapy that you have to start with, because it is only when you go. So with those founders of your last aid of the agency you were with before, you definitely have to get them to dig deeper. Like particularly with a lot of it's not just the men, but some of the older women, I have to dig a little bit harder. I have to get them to go a little bit like, yeah, but why? I do the five whys. Yeah, why? Keep going. And then you unlock something really special. And it's not always pain. A lot of stuff comes from pain. A lot of stuff comes from pure joy or observation or
Mhm.
a desire. And it's just finding that little bit. It's like with any great stories. And I think actually your story for why you created this
Mhm.
is brilliant, and do you tell that enough? Because I think that's incredibly inspirational.
Well, I think that's a really pertinent point in the sense that, like, I feel like I've told that story maybe a billion times, but there will always be someone who hasn't heard it, and like getting over yourself to a certain extent when you realize it's like getting over yourself is a very flippant way of saying that, but like realizing that there will be people who haven't heard that story, but when you do and people
Yeah.
resonate, then
And
it's
don't forget, oh, actually, Mel just says it there. You're the only one who sees your own content. You're so right.
100%.
We get tired of, and even in marketing teams, you'd get tired of stuff and say, "Oh no, we can't put that out again." Yet
Yeah,
where out was like way down.
yeah,
And I think as personal brand, the one things I've had to get more comfortable with is going, "But I've already said that," which is incredibly naive to think that the billion people on LinkedIn have all seen my one post.
it's so true.
So I'm learning to get comfortable being repetitive. And the thing is, you remix it. Look, as a DJ, I love the idea of remixing. I'm all about reinvention and remix. And I think that's the beauty of what we do. Learn from what resonates, learn from what you hear, tell other people's stories. I love telling other people's stories. Don't believe in admiring quietly. I want to admire loudly. So I think there's a lot there.
That's amazing. Love that so much. Right, let's head into the questions because we want to make sure that the community is heard beyond the wonderful chat feature. And by the way, Nishma, hopefully you can see in the chat that both Hannah and Helen have picked up on the quote "admire loudly." And I think
Oh,
that's really,
yeah.
really beautiful. So thank you. Let's
I'm
head
going to
into.
have to do a collab with Hannah. I'm really excited about going to look at your business, Hannah, and to be in touch after this.
Put in interaction the things that work. So right. So I haven't read these questions, so I'm going to be doing it live with you here, Nishma. So we will go. But the questions gravitated to the top of the Q&A, and I would just encourage you folks to give a thumbs up to any questions that you like, so we prioritize them. I'm going to take this first one, which says, starting a business can be overwhelming in terms of all the competing priorities and things that need doing. What do you see as the priority areas to build and focus on when starting a business? And maybe if we interchange the words business and marketing, just so we can broaden it out for the whole audience. So,
Yeah.
working in marketing can be overwhelming in terms of all the competing priorities. So how do you prioritize?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the greatest challenge, whether it's business or marketing, is the prioritization. So I've had to, I mean, we were ruthless about prioritization at Google, and it was still overwhelming. I find it even harder now, which I can't believe I'm saying. Um, so I have a very simple rule around this, and it is to say, okay, going back to that point around what's going to keep the customer really, who you're doing this for. You're trying to delight someone. So I always start with there, any kind of action or thought that's going to be supporting either your knowledge of, your delivery to, your nurturing of. It has to be kind of will always sit at the top of what I do. Beyond that, the priorities are for me now, and I think for a lot of business, should be around what are the free available ways to communicate and scale. That is personal brand, it's things like LinkedIn, it's the organic channels, organic social channels, consistency of how you turn up. I think and newsletters, right? I know we're all in love with email newsletters, but what a
Mhm.
way to really have a closer dialogue with your audience and start to kind of nurture that. They all require time and effort because it's going to be about good content, good storytelling, and the your scheduling around how you want those things to appear in someone's life and the 360 surround sound. But I think it's easy to not value that in the same way because in theory it's not against like a budget number, but I
Mm.
actually think I would overinvest in that than I do elsewhere. I think the monetary parts, if you're trying to look at your priorities and what do you do next, I think it's about really like what are you expecting from it? So there has to be an element of test and learn with everything, unless you've got a really repeatable channel that very I get the ROI. It's literally if you're at that point, amazing, you're very lucky. But with most of us, we're going, okay, we'll try this and do that. But I think it's almost like documenting your experiments. I think one of the things we don't do very well and I've again put my hands up to doing this is do we document those experiments well enough? And I mean by what's the thing you're experimenting with? It might be format, it might be audience, because you're trying to reach a different audience, it might be the creative or the story or the angle, whatever. But document it. Don't have too many because you can't test them all. And make sure you document afterwards because that's the only way you're going to build up a body of evidence to say, okay, I'm now going to combine that and try that next. But I think that's how I prioritize. I think, the AI and the resourcing bit is really important. but I still would put that probably after the organic and the storytelling and the reach. Genuinely, and I'm not paid by LinkedIn. I wish I bloody was, and they should hire me at some point because I keep telling
Same,
everyone
same.
about it. Them and a few of my AI tools I keep telling I must get myself on some kind of deal. But I've seen an outsized impact for business on LinkedIn. It's a thing we ignored for ages and now is delivering huge returns if you can do it right. And if you can do it right, it means stand out, be relevant, be useful, and be consistent. So it's like remember the free your channels, newsletters, organic channels, etc., to really sweat those hard before you consider kind of investment pieces. And investment pieces should always be done as experiments.
Love that. And what I particularly, applying that lesson to my own context, I think we probably have a lot of experiments going on at any one point. But when you mention the documentation piece, like, I'm not sure we ever really write them down. And I think whether or not you even care about the results so much, just being thoughtful about the things that you're experimenting by writing them down
Yeah.
seems like a useful mechanism to just sort of bring into your life. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's absolutely bang on. Um, the next question takes you back to the beach on your holiday. And so
But
Molly, Molly has asked, you mentioned AI training courses that you did on the beach. Can you share the ones you recommend?
yes, absolutely. And actually, so first of all, gosh, wouldn't we all like to be at the beach? Although it is sunny today, so I'm not going to complain.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to share the ones I did then, but I'll be honest, that was in January 24.
Hmm.
And I think there are much better ones now. I do have a list though, so I'm happy to send to you, Joe, which you can then share with the community, ones that I'm keeping on top of that I'm happy to share that I've either been doing or am doing or will do. So I think one of the best things we can all do for each other is keep sharing the good stuff we find.
Hmm.
So whenever I find a really good training, I tell everyone about it because I think one of the most important things is to not create any kind of AI skills gap. We've all got to learn at the same time and be progressive in it. So definitely send you. Interestingly, both Google and OpenAI have obviously, no surprise, lots of courses. So they have most of them are free, not all of them, but most of them are free. Definitely worth hunting around. I know Google do quite a good one around prompt, like getting better at prompts. OpenAI have a lot of them about obviously using GPTs better, but I would say my experience of the past and even now is most of us are using most technology at around at best 50% of its actual capability. So learning how to get everything out of it is completely gold dust. And then I have some other more general ones that give you. There's a really great website that I sign up to their newsletter and use regularly, which is called There's an AI for That. And I think
Yeah.
it's acronymed as TAA, whatever. There's an AI for that. It's a great way of finding out about new ones. So yeah, stay hungry on that stuff, and I'm happy to share the ones I've got already.
100%. Thank you so much. And we were speaking about this before we went live today. Just like we were speaking specifically around optimism, but I think what you also embody with your answer there is curiosity.
Mm.
Um, I just wanted to make a note of that because I loved your answer because you used the word hungry there, and that's wicked, and I really admire that. But I'd love also that you're embodying a sense of optimism because at the very, very beginning, you said this has been way harder than I thought.
Way harder.
And, just combining that sort of thought of being way harder, but also the hungriness and the curiosity and everything else. I think those are such important character traits that are not easy to have. I don't want to say in times like this because it sometimes overloads it, but, just I think that's so important. So I just wanted to note how much I admire that,
Oh, thank you.
but
Yeah,
also
I think it is hard, and we'll have days where we kind of have to lift each other and fill each other's cup. But I think that curiosity and optimism and genuine belief about like we will get there. It's a lot nicer to do it together and kind of makes it easier.
100%, 100%. That's what it's all about. Um, there's a question that's come in here from an anonymous attendee who has asked on a very tactical level something, but I'd love to dip into your experience on this. So the anonymous attendee has asked, for small businesses with a local focus, what are the best analog tactics and the best digital tactics you've found in your career from analog to AI? Now,
Yeah.
obviously, when we ask a question like this, it's always going to be very context dependent. But I wonder whether you have any stories or any sort of
Yeah.
reflections on tactic selection.
So one of the key when I was at Google, we ran this great campaign. It was post pandemic, and it was one of our most successful campaigns. And I loved it. Was one I worked on directly with my team and really enjoyed it. And it was all around. It was called Dear Local, and it was this idea that obviously through the pandemic we had been much more kind of kinder and fair and um, interested in our local businesses. And there was obviously a fear that that would then move back into as old ways. And we encouraged people that one of the things when we surveyed a lot of small businesses, they talked about one of the most effective means of them getting more business were reviews.
Mm,
And so we had this thing which was Dear Local, which was what we encouraged people to do to go, if you've had a great experience, it comes back to my kind of admire loudly. If you've had a great experience, you've got to encourage people to write that review because it has such an influence in people's decisions of choice, particular local area. So I think one of those things is really important. Like, actually, are you really using reviews? Are you encouraging people to leave them? What are you doing? It's then what you do with those reviews. So again, it's like you see big brands doing stuff for their customers and these experiences, lots of talk about like Refi Cosmetics, not pandering to the influencers, but actually kind of taking care of their customers. I'd love to see kind of more local businesses go, let's take the top five-star reviews and invite them in for some
mm,
dinner and take some photographs and create some local buzz and news on whether it's sort of kind of social media or you make literally physical presence awareness there. And also then think about, I did some work recently with the post office around direct mail. And yes, there's a cost to attach to it, but it's the fact that it has longevity in a home means that it can be a very, very effective medium. And I think, again, local businesses with a good bit of photography, a great bit of story, relevance there, drop through letterboxes and having a locally, and now you can do incredible level of targeting with the post office as well through market reach. Really thinking about some sort of smart, personalized, relevant, targeted campaigns can be really, really effective. So I think it's actually about coming back to kind of I know what I said earlier, but we saw with that Dear Local campaign, we were encouraging people to share a bit of love with their local business. We had Anthony Joshua and Sheridan Smith did something in their area, and it was brilliant. It kind of was a great way because it was really authentic. It was in Anthony Joshua straight down the street in Golders Green, and but he knew all the business owners. It wasn't like fake at all. It was really genuine, and he wanted to say thank you to those businesses, from the dry cleaners to the cafe, whatever. But it encouraged people to share positive appreciation for businesses,
mm,
and do that. Within that, there's also going to be the challenge of when you get negative reviews and negative appreciation. And there's two ways to deal with that. So when I was leading reputation at Google, we used to have a very clear way of, you'd get all sorts of unnecessary and unwarranted crap thrown at you. I don't mean the stuff that we were right, you needed to be held accountable, but I mean the other stuff.
mm,
Because we never responded to it. It was always, I had a belief that was always like when people get mean, you just go, you go, when people get negative, we basically created more positivity. We highlighted even more positive stories to just demonstrate that that was a single voice, not representative. And I
mm.
think sometimes with business owners is you need to think about that. If there's some warrant in that negative response, is always, step forward, be accountable, take responsibility, be personal in your response is really important.
Love that. When they go low, you go high.
Yeah,
Is a
exactly.
um, let's take the opposite way. So we're coming into the last 5 minutes, and you've been doing so well, and you've been so generous with your knowledge. So thank you very much, Nishma. And again, thank you to the community for being
Yeah, thank
completely
you for
wonderful.
everybody being here and so engaged and asking great questions. There are a
It's really
few in the chat as well that I'm going to have to find a way to comment back because I'd love to. Somebody here talking about struggling with storytelling and that, and I'd love to help
yeah,
them with some
yeah,
of
yeah.
it.
Spot on. That's gone to hosts and panelists only, so we'll make sure to pick up with the person there afterwards. So there's a question here from Amber, which I think is just really interesting. So Amber's asked, do you have any advice or food for thought for the other way around? How can bigger companies incorporate a startup mindset to better themselves? And
Yeah,
yeah, I found that fascinating. It was the opposite of what we were trying to get
yeah,
out today, but
exactly.
honestly, it's a really great question. So thank you very
And
much.
every business wants to do it. And I can't remember how many times at Google we used to say, I like an owner, do that. Not always easy, I'm going
Yeah.
to be honest, not always easy. But I think there's a number of things, right? So one of the key things, as I said, I think when you're a startup is that level of innovation. Like you really have to think differently. You cannot follow sometimes well-trodden paths. You've got to go, well, actually, what's locally available, financially available, resources, whatever it might be. And I think the hardest thing in larger businesses is losing some of that innovation. So you either do it in bubbles, where you go, right, let's have an innovation hack or whatever. And I think one of the biggest misses, and definitely was, my time at Google and the 10 years there, but I know beyond that as well, was some of the greatest ideas genuinely came from sort of on the floor from people who were sharing it. And we lost the art of that as it got more and more bureaucratic, it became harder for those stories to kind of surface and be, people take a chance on them. So I think one of the key things larger businesses need to do is like, how do you really start to actually kind of like leave your silo at the door attitude to innovation? And one of the ways to spark that is to maybe take three or four hypotheses or examples or insights from your customer base and ask people to solve them in different ways. I had one that I did. I'm not sure everyone can adopt this one because it's a little bit naughty, but I used to have sort of under the radar in my team at Google, we used to have a bit of a thing. I used to say, come up with an idea that will get us fired.
Nice.
So you'd have to come up with an idea that was, not illegal or like fires, like don't be decent, whatever, but something that felt so out of place and risky that it would make us all go, oh,
Yeah.
because it was knowing that if we could go that far, we would bring it back to a point that we weren't going to get fired. But the danger was we were always starting here, which meant we only ever went here. And what I needed to do was kind of go, right, all guards are off. What do we do? And what happens is that you get like really silly and crazy stuff. And that's okay because it's in the silly and crazy stuff that you take bits and then crafted better ideas from. So I think that kind of innovative thinking that startups have needs to be brought into big business. And then I think the other thing is around small support smaller agencies and talent. I think we get so locked in big business to only use the obvious larger players. I think the magic is in individual creators and small businesses. I used to have a percentage or a proportion of the work that I did at Google was I always went to smaller agencies. I didn't want to just be with the big on roster agencies because for me, I actually felt like specialism and expertise and being just a little bit closer and hungrier for ideas and opportunity always netted better. So I think, it's recognizing where the experts are and go to them and find them and try and think about more innovative thinking.
I love that so much. I recognize that in myself. I'm very conservative in terms of my outlook on business, and so like actually that is such a wicked tip, which is replicated in the chat as well. I want to ask one last question. It might be a very short answer, but I feel like it really fits your wheelhouse, Nishma. So I hope you don't mind me squeezing it in.
Oh, not at all.
The question is, I'm coming out of a 25-year career in museums and heritage and wanting to own what I do by becoming a freelance consultant. I'm really great at selling and supporting others, but bad at hyping myself up. What tips can you give me to make a change in this area? And what is the most important thing for me to consider before setting up my own business?
Oh, I love this question.
Yeah, I thought you might. And so I didn't want the session to finish without asking.
Yeah, no, I really love this question. So first of all, well done. Congratulations for making the decision to move. Never easy to make that reinvention move. So very quickly, there's a number of things. You are going to have so many wonderful stories and experiences. My goodness, you're going to be able to be like chock-a-block with things that you can tell and share. It is really hard to hype yourself, and it's about making small steps to do so, particularly when you've got to get comfortable with that sense of self-promotion or self-hype. And so, starting to write regularly. David Hyatt talks about 10 minutes every day. I went and did his course. I loved it. Great practice to start doing it. And the most important thing is you just have to start. You have to start sharing. I always say to people, it doesn't matter how awkward it feels, you've got to step forward and share. So I take the moment to step back as you are from your role to think about what you want to offer. So who do you want to talk to? Who's the audience? All the classic marketing stuff. Who's your audience? Who's your key messages? But then start playing with the stories. And every day, like if LinkedIn's your route to market, do that there and start building it from there. And I think um, sign up to the Glittersphere, and I'd love to have a chat with you
Yeah,
about it.
it struck me. I don't know whether you had a plant, but there was like
Yeah,
a
I should have done. God, I didn't think about
perfectly
that,
set.
Joe.
Yeah, that's the final tip for the day. But not at all. Nishma, you've been fantastic. Thank you so much for your generosity and the practicality, as well as just being like the folks in the chat are saying engaging, which is just like,
Um,
a real skill and a real treat. So thank you so much for
Thank you. I'm a huge fan of everything you do, Joe. So thank you so
super.
much for having me on.
Not at all. A real delight. we're going to call it there, folks. So thank you all, and thank you all for just being completely wonderful as ever. It's always an absolute joy. Um, I'm gonna say a big thank you here to our sponsors as ever, because it's really important to acknowledge these companies, because without them, TMM wouldn't exist, and so the community is fabulous. But these folks put their hands in their pocket every month to support our community. So a big thank you to Sticky Beat, Cambridge Marketing College, Planable, Redgate, and Frontify. Appreciate them lots, just like we appreciate every one of you. We'll be back next Tuesday with Surreal's copywriter, a lovely man called John Thornton, who also was the copywriter over at Innocent as well while they were growing. So a fabulous session for you all. With all that said, we will see you next week. So thank you, Nishma. You've been
Thank
incredible.
you.
And thank you all. Take care, everyone. Have a great week.
Bye.